Actually go live.
There we go.
And here we are.
All right,
everyone,
welcome, folks.
to episode 29, the ever-present snow, as we are joined by a strange weather phenomenon from over the pond.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so to start us off tonight, I will be doing the opening prayer. God's help us all. As we gather tonight, let us remember our goddesses, those who stood tall in the face of adversity, those who knew their own worth, those who faced overwhelming odds and overcame them by power, by wit, and guile. Those who were quiet and those who were steadfast, those who were loud and those who sat behind and supported those who were forward in the line. Hail to all of our goddesses of sovereignty and power, our goddesses of healing and hearth and home, our goddesses of childbirth and ending of pregnancies, our goddesses who bless us in every way with their presence and relationships, the goddesses who echo through our lives, in our blood and bone, in the air we breathe, the Holy Mother Earth beneath our feet, and all around us. Hail to you, O holy ones. May you ever be hailed. Astu Heil.
Indeed. Hey, all. Oh, we hit show at the same time. Thank you, Sarenth, for that opening prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, let's introduce our guest. This is Snow, who is known by several names across a million different Discord servers. And I don't know, you tell us about yourself, Snow, for people who aren't familiar with you somehow.
Somehow. I mean, considerably fewer Discord servers these days. I mean, for what, like 7 months, I was at the max limit, and then I bought Nitro. So then your max limit doubles, and then I hit that max limit, and then I went, this is daft. So yeah, yeah, I'm co-administrator of the Skithbladnir server on Discord. I write stuff on WordPress occasionally. I harass Sarenth and Maleck occasionally. Yeah. I'm a member of Sidious Radio Yisaulis, the Gothic heathenry tradition started by Sunareda, who is Gunny, who kind of helmed the Longship, which people may or may not be familiar with. I think that covers it.
I mean, that's a lot.
I was going to say, that's a lot. Card popped in the chat, says, can't believe the next episode is number 30. I know.
Right.
Also, for those who are interested, this is Snow's WordPress. And you all should be interested because this is her fucking guest. So go check them out, give them a like and a follow.
Mm-hmm. And it's genuinely good stuff. I did promise Snow that I would bully them on air for the entire internet and make them, say positive things. So, living up to the promise already.
It's just what Maleck does for all of their friends.
I mean, yeah, that's what you do.
Aggressive positivity.
It's done in love.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed. So
how about we get to talking about what it is you actually do? You're a polytheist, you're a writer. So who are the gods you worship? How is it different from, say, Norse heathenry?
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I'd say I probably have a fairly more eclectic mix than sort of your standard heathen I encounter. I mean, when I first got onto, okay, so how far back are we going here? So
All the way.
growing up, I grew up in a house with parents who kind of essentially kind of studied religion and philosophy to varying degrees of formality. My dad having been involved with martial arts for like 4 decades by that point, was really into East Asian philosophy and stuff. And my mum had done religious studies courses with the Open University. And so growing up, there's stuff on Taoism and Buddhism and Quakerism and Catholicism and Judaism and Wicca around the house. And so, I mean, a friend pointed out that I might be the only person they know that could actually qualify as raised pagan, even though I don't really consider myself to have been raised pagan. It was just kind of everything was around, and my parents just kind of went, we're going to do what we're going to do, and you can do what you want to do. And, you know, if we end up joining in, whatever. So then throughout my teens, I kind of considered myself pagan intermittently to varying degrees. And then I hit Discord and then kind of was like, oh, there are people like putting serious time and work and effort into all of this. It's not like some kind of loose ideas people have. And, oh, wow, there are people reading books and talking about stuff. And so then I kind of started with meshing a kind of Gaelic Celtic polytheist angle with a kind of Norse heathenry angle, which kind of works historically if you think about the Norse Gaels, sort of, you know, around the eastern border of Ireland and around the north and west of Scotland and the Isle of Man and the Hebridean Kingdom and all that. Kind of, you know, the settling of Iceland with Gaelic slaves and whatnot.
Snow, the strict pantheons, you've got to keep them separate.
Oh, I know.
Gotta
It's,
keep
yeah.
them separated.
And then being around on Skidbladnir, I kept seeing sort of Sonoreda's work, sort of constructing and working on Sidious Radius Solis. And then one day I just kind of messaged her and went, I think I've been internalizing your notes without realizing it. Like, I'm doing this and I hadn't noticed I'm doing this, and I'm doing this with different gods.
FYI, for those who don't know who Gunny is the person who put together the almost indispensable at this point website, thelongship.net. It is, as far as I'm concerned, the resource for beginner heathens and for folks who just want to knock the rust off. Like, seriously, it's an excellent resource. Please check it out. Gunny, I would like consider praises to the heavens for all time, because the fact of the matter is that getting any of this shit collated the way she has, in the manner that she has, where it's accessible, informative, and accurate, damn.
Yeah.
Sorry, just...
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I keep winding her up by saying that I'm a Sonoredanist.
I'm sure she loves that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's super a fan.
Galloping over the Atlantic with a flaming spear, and
I get it. She just wants to make a bunch of really devotional swole heathens, and I fully appreciate that.
You know?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of gods I worship regularly, I mean, my kind of core stable horse jokes would kind of be Milukethi, who is kind of one of SRS's. People say reconstructed gods. I prefer revealed gods. I don't know if that nuance sort of clicks with people, or if people view them as synonymous terms.
No.
But for me, reconstructed god sounds like it's an intellectual exercise. Revealed god sounds like you found there's actually something there. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, so that's kind of how I view my own stuff with my kind of North Sea persist, which Maleck might have heard of, and then sort of the SRS gods, because sort of looking into the history of the Gothic peoples, in terms of written records, there's a very kind of slim window of stuff before, oh, now they're Christians and we have people focusing on them attacking the Roman Empire. So there isn't like a rich body of text comparable to the Eddas or something like that for us to go, well, they were worshipping this god and that god, and, you know, sort of attestations. And so a lot of it is sort of reconstruction and revelation. And so, you know, for myself, regularly, there's sort of Melukithe and Ahwa, and then sort of more, I guess, solidly attested sort of from other things. I've worshipped Anmargen for years and years and years. For about the last year, I worship Janus on the 1st of every month and celebrate Calends there.
So for those who don't know, Janus is
Janus.
Ah, okay.
IJ,
Sorry.
sort of the way that Latin works.
My translation from written English to Latin pronunciation is awful, so I was like,
just think of it as I Janus.
I mean, it's you know, IANVS. Like,
I think I killed Maleck.
I accidentally breathed some of my mead earlier, and it's not treating me super well.
Oh no!
Yeah. So.
Yes, thank you, Emily.
Interesting. So, rather than being hived off into separate practices, what you're doing is taking kind of a stone soup approach to different cultures, as they probably would have existed at different points in history. And I kind of just want to jump off of that and like really emphasize that this is actual historically based polytheism as opposed to strict separated hierarchies of relationship.
Right.
Which is something that I think more people are starting to grok onto, but we've had the notion of pantheons that has existed for so long as something in the public consciousness. These are separate gods, separate from each other. They never meet. They never interact. You know, so this is kind of the antithesis of that. It's not eclecticism for its own sake, which is, you know, fine if that's what you're doing. But it's a practiced polytheism where you are blending these different paths in a way that cosmologically makes sense as well as personally.
Right. I mean, sort of, I think it was sort of the other week I said to somebody, Pantheons work if you're going to go play Age of Mythology on your Windows 98. Pantheons don't really work in polytheism in sort of that sense.
But how else will I collect enough worship points to strike my enemies down with Zeus's lightning?
Yeah. I miss those games. Those are games you can't play when you get a Mac.
Wonk wonk.
Right.
Uni degree, Age of Mythology.
I mean, here in America, I think I'd take the Age of Mythology. I might get more enjoyment out of it. I'm just saying, as a degree holder,
Right,
who also owns Age of Mythology.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I myself think I definitely went through the kind of lime collecting sort of Pokemon, gotta catch 'em all kind of thing, which I think a lot of people go through, and I think a lot of people never really get out of it.
So you're a polytheist,
right? But I think it's sort of either having a reason or having the connection, and if neither of those are there, you're worshipping them because you sat there and you went, well, I have a god for work, and I have a god for home, and I have a god for relationships. Who's running my car? Oh, I better go look up someone. And that's why on Skid Bladnir, often when people say, well, who do I go to for X, Y, or Z? We often just go, well, who are you close to? Who are you already worshipping? How can their domains be sort of poetically or metaphorically or even literally transferable to the thing that you're looking at? I mean, an example I used to go to a lot when people would say, oh, well, you know, it's not like the Norse had computers, so, you know, how am I going to find a god to help me with my laptop? And they're like, hang on, Thor, storms, lightning, electricity, computers. That's, you know, Kevin Bacon's 5 degrees. Like,
You
not wrong
know it's
either.
going to be really weird when Kevin Bacon dies and we're all doing ancestor cultists. It'll be like, you know what it'll be like? It'll be like worshiping the, what do you call it? The oldest ancestor in the matrilineal lines, the mitochondrial Eve.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Just 5 degrees to Kevin Bacon. It's fine.
5 degrees to
Snow,
Valhalla.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Before we move on, what is everybody drinking? Since, you know, this is a
yeah.
show that's about drinking, and none of us have talked about what we're drinking yet.
The thing that I breathed earlier was
Ooh.
Royal Reserve by St. Ambrose. It's a mead with grape neutral spirits because it's 19% alcohol. So basically, they took mead and spiked it with neutral grape spirits to get that ABV up. And they did that for a specific purpose. Aged in American oak, bourbon, and cognac barrels for 2 years, Royal Reserve is fit for kings and queens. Discover flavors of butterscotch and honey, with aromas of green melon, pear, and honeysuckle. Best served slightly chilled. Slightly chilled in this case being room temperature.
Emily says, ooh, yummy Maleck, and I will agree, I've had that.
It's fucking delicious. And also, it's local because St. Ambrose is in Michigan. And yeah, it's really good. I don't think it's technically a piment because it's not brewed with the grapes. I think they added the spirits after, which would make it more akin to a port than a piment.
So it's like a fortified wine?
Yeah, at least that's my understanding.
Okay.
But yeah, it's similar.
All right, Snow, what are you drinking?
Well, so appropriately enough for a booze podcast, I don't drink. But
legit.
So when I did drink, my go-to beer was Guinness because obviously, and so sort of not long after not long after I stopped drinking, Guinness then advertised, we're now doing a 0% alcohol-free Guinness. And all my friends went, you have the weirdest timing for everything.
Timing.
Right.
Coincidence.
Yeah. I believe in those.
Yeah. And so a few months back, my other half went to the shop and was like, so Co-op have these now.
Nice.
Oh, that's cool.
Right.
That is really
and
cool.
So I was like, okay. And so, you know, they don't do them in 8-packs like the proper stuff. They just do them in 4-packs. So you have to buy twice as much. But it tastes more or less how I remember. But then for a while, they were out of stock with that. And so in their place, they'd got these.
Interesting.
Now,
I love that drop.
Looking at that, where would you guess this was from?
Well, Australia.
But it ain't.
Of course it's not.
It is. Hang on, where is the address? Was on here somewhere. Gower House, Terry Farknad, Swansea, Wales.
Of course.
So we have Welsh alcohol-free beer that thinks it's Australian.
I mean, to be fair, we have Outback Steakhouse.
Well,
so.
To the point that not only is it called Dropbear Beer Company with the sort of grizzly koala logo, on the side of this one it says blast AC/DC as loud as you can and light a bonfire whilst drinking espresso and doing a handstand on a surfboard.
Yep.
So they're going all in on the Australian thing there. So that is the bonfire stout, which I've had before. That one is nice. And then this one I've just poured, but I haven't actually tried this one. This one is the Tropical IPA.
Ooh.
Oh, same company. Gotcha.
And Dropbear does. These are all alcohol free. I take it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And also the Yuzu Pale Ale, which I will try in a bit.
Oh, okay.
To have not
intriguing.
just one, but at least 3 alcohol-free beers in different styles is really interesting. That's really neat.
Right.
Yeah, because I'd never heard of it, and then they sort of had a shelf full of them in the shop down the street. And then the brand is like, we've won loads of awards for alcohol-free beer in this country. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, you're not
Probably not
Carling or Coors, so I'll give it a go.
Yeah. Probably not that hard to win awards for alcohol-free beer because it's kind of a slim market, but
It's niche, yeah.
you know, that's
It's
awesome.
not. It's not O'Doul's.
So this is the. So this
But
is
then
the
again, I don't hate
this
myself.
is the tropical IPA.
Oh, that's
Very nice.
pretty.
That is pretty
So
very nice.
Very
What are
well.
you drinking, Sarah?
Well, I'm drinking two things right this minute. One of my partners got me Grand Traverse bourbon, and this is a single barrel straight bourbon whiskey from barrel number 407. It is 66% alcohol by volume. This stuff goes down real nice and smooth. The other thing I'm drinking is this elderflower liqueur that I made myself.
Nice.
This is the first time I've had this in literally years. It has been so long that the alcohol and the fumes and everything sucked to the can lid down and sealed it. So I had to actually go get my can opener to open it again. So
Very nice.
I used 100 proof. I think it was vodka. So this will be interesting. Now this is the
Color on that's wonderful.
oh yes. That's the liqueur.
Mm-hmm.
And the elderflower, I used about, I want to say, a pound of elderflower in it. And literally, if you want to make your own liqueur, it's dead simple. You just shake the shit out of anywhere from 6 ounces to a pound worth of material in I think this is a pint, maybe a little bit bigger. Fill a mason jar with 80 or 100 proof alcohol. Shake the shit out of it once a day for like 2 or 3 weeks. Leave it in a place where it's not going to get hit by sunlight and it's cool. And you will make yourself some, and you can do it with damn near anything. You can do it with cherries. You can do it with herbs. You can do it with almost anything that you think of that you can put into a glass, you could do as a liqueur. And elderflowers present this really, it smooths out the harshness of the vodka, because the vodka I use has a very sharp taste. It is way mellowed, and it's got this really flowery, almost sunny feeling when you drink it. Like Emily said, have you tried it yet? 'Tis potent, because I gave her a shot glass before I ran downstairs. And this is the Grand Traverse bourbon.
Very nice.
Oh, it smells so good. Oh. The smoke on it is very forward. It's really good stuff. I can't drink too much of it, though. The ABV is huge. Woo! Whew. So, speaking of mixing different liquors and different things, I think that's a really interesting point, both in terms of like the non-alcoholic versus alcoholic. You know, how do I bring this into my practice in a way that honors me as well as honors them? And I think, you know, one of the great benefits of living in the modern day, I'm going to point out this because Josie's point is really salient.
Not everyone can or wants to drink alcohol. Having actually flavorful non-alcoholic options is great. It really is.
Yeah, so you don't have to drink like potato water like I did.
And it's great because you also don't like olives, and you made a drink where literally the main flavor component is olives.
At least you said potato water and not spud juice.
I mean,
I think you broke my brain. Fine.
Yeah. So, like, I think getting back on track. So this is So, oh Jesus, she wants me to tell the story.
Oh,
So, long story short, we tried doing a non-alcoholic episode with cocktails. This was back when Carr was co-host, and I thought to myself, I got it. I'm gonna do a non-alcoholic martini. I hate myself. So the recipe called for olives and potato juice. It was a bad idea. It was just straight salt. Oh God, I can still taste it.
You also had the olive brine in the drink, so it was like potato water
Plus olive brine
with olives as a garnish.
Yeah. It sure was an idea. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was a pretty early episode.
Yeah.
I think it was in the first 10.
Yeah, it was very early on.
There's so many more options to non-alcoholic stuff now. And I agree, even those who drink alcohol might not always want to have it. And that's true. Mm-hmm. Like there it is where I'm like, I want a fruity alcoholic style drink, but I don't want the alcohol.
Mm-hmm. It's like you get plenty of people who are like, I like the taste, but I also have work tomorrow morning.
Right. That is why Sarenth gets to try things first. Because he will. And, you know.
He is the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Odin's son is the sacrifice.
You know, you don't have to come on the show and just beat me about the head and legs with truth.
I mean, I think he does, though. But
I mean, you turned up late.
Right. I'm trying to think of exactly the phrasing when I did that to Snow in Welcome Channel that one time. This was early on when you were first talking about, oh, yeah, I realized that my entire practice is centered around the North Sea.
Uh-huh.
And you were talking about all these rivers and all the gods that you were working with or working on building a practice with them, and how everything was centered around the North Sea. And I said, so Snow, who's the god of the North Sea? And you said, oh, yeah. And you went on this long spiel about something else. And I was like, yeah, but who's the god of the North Sea? And your response was, I don't need your negativity at this time.
So Josie said, hours of work for that potato starch monstrosity law, but damn, did you try? Yeah, I did. It was literally hours of work to get that fucking potato starch.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was so not worth it. Here, spike your blood sugar. You're going to hate yourself later.
Right.
Non-alcoholic meat would be honey water. Yeah, and honestly, it tastes really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like just straight up.
There's a lot of recipes online for what's called driver's mead, because if you're the designated driver, you can make this. It tastes like mead, but no alcohol. So yeah.
It'll just be jittery from the sugar high.
Yeah, it's fine. Wrenching it back on track for a second. Who is the god of the North Sea?
Tell us, Snow. Tell us.
Since I told the story, come on.
I was going to say, I didn't realize I was so quotable, but increasingly I keep seeing people writing, as Snow often says. Like, I guess. So yes, I mean, in kind of my sort of reconstructed North Sea kind of practice, I venerate Maradix Libis, which literally translates to kind of king of the life waters. And I kind of venerate him half the year. And then the other half of the year, we have Maradix Mauri, which translates to sort of king of the death waters, so sort of that balance there. And so a friend of mine, Casanar, helped with the terminology there, because Maradix Libis is reconstructed Proto-Germanic, Maradix Mauri is reconstructed Gaulish, and it was kind of having the Germanic language and the Celtic language there sort of help with this idea of the contrasts, and also help with the idea of the diversity around the North Sea. because I, live on an island that was inhabited and invaded and by Germanic people and Celtic people, and those were the people traveling and trading and warring and enslaving across the North Sea. Because if you look up sort of the biggest sort of rivers going into the North Sea, they come through France and Germany and the Netherlands and Britain and Scandinavia, and so you get all of that. And so for half the year I venerate Marorix Libus, sort of his waters that carry life and are bountiful and fertile. And then the other half of the year is kind of the wild hunt half of the year, where I have Marorix Maori with the kind of seeking of death, or the king of the Dead Sea, where he is out sort of traveling from the sea down the rivers into land, sort of leading the charge and leading part of the hunt. And so you've got that kind of contrast there. That's who the god of the North Sea is, Maleck.
Good, thanks.
You're
I
welcome.
feel enlightened. I had a thought. It's gone. I don't remember. It's fine. Oh, you and I have talked a lot recently about kind of the give and take of esoteric versus exoteric praxis, and how that kind of interplays with Sarenth.
All of Sarenth's favorite words in his favorite order.
Yes!
Right? And kind of, we've talked a lot about so far in this half hour. How has it already been a half hour? Jesus.
No, we haven't talked about Jesus yet, but we could.
We could. No, that was Cabra last episode.
Ah.
We've talked a lot about like different traditions and gods from Gaul and Germania and the Goths and everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Damn it, brain, come on. Give and
So
take
go ahead.
exoteric and esoteric praxis, where do you draw that line, and how does that kind of play into, not theoretically, but the actual practice of your praxis?
I think one thing I try to be, I think as far as sort of public facing stuff goes, I'm at the other end of that scale to sort of you two. But I think behind the scenes, perhaps not so much. Because sort of with being co-administrator of Skidbladnir, with the blog and Twitter and whatever else, there's A, the realization you don't know who you're talking to, and B, the realization that you don't know how much the person you're talking to knows or does or whatever. And I very much run with the theory of build esoteric upon exoteric. And so I'm very much in favor of encouraging people to work out sort of their core basis of their religion and their praxis, work out what their rituals are, sort of get rolling with that, get their rituals and their prayers, and get those relationships built and growing and progressing and going somewhere. And then if there is an inclination towards the esoteric stuff, whatever that be, then I think a lot of the time people naturally stumble into it, just following signposts or as a need arises. Because I think, and I'm sure you two could probably comment on this more so, when people look at the esoteric stuff and go, ooh, shiny, fancy magic, how do I get to there from being at church with my parents last week? You're kind of sitting there going, you're doing this backwards and missing steps 1 to 99 to get to this 100th step where you're sitting there talking to a god and doing magic. And so that's kind of the way that I view it. And having being friends with Selgowiros for such a long time, one thing he's very fond of pointing out is that esoteric means hidden. If you're doing your divination and your journeying and your magic and, you know, your Seidr or whatever, and everything is on film and everything is being written out and everything is going online, then yes, that makes for wonderful guides for people. And yes, you can show people having these experiences that it's not just them, or there is a community out there for them. But how much of that relationship is then still yours? Like I think it's slightly uncomfortable when people compare their relationships with the divine to their relationships with other humans. But I mean, to a degree, to sort of slightly do that, if you and your significant other, like if every single little thing that is said between you and done between you makes it onto Facebook, how great is that relationship when you get back home and you're lying in bed at night? Like everyone knows your business, and sort of what is there left for you to? And so sort of thinking about this idea of esoteric meant hidden and meant secret, it's kind of really, for me, it's really thinking about, am I saying this and sort of giving advice or whatever to really help someone and show them that, you know, there are people out there doing X, Y, Z, or they're not alone or whatever? Or am I just kind of pulling up all the curtains and opening all the windows and saying, come on in and bring a camera?
That's a really good point. I think for some people, the esoteric wallops them over the head first, and they have to figure out the exoteric as they go. And I feel for those people. But I think if you've got the option, do the exoteric first, because the foundations that you're laying now build up so that your esoteric is grounded.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the biggest issue that I find within paganism and occultism in regards to esoteric versus exoteric practice is that the foundation isn't there, so they don't know what the flying fuck they're talking to.
Right.
So, I mean, and this is going to sound harsh and judgmental and deal, but if you don't have a foundation for what in the Sam Hill you're doing and who you're talking to and why, doing Seidr without any background knowledge on what it is, how you do it, what it means, you are throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And the spaghetti you get off the wall is not going to be what you want to put in your pot or on your plate necessarily.
I think not just that as well, but also if you have the exoteric foundation, you've given yourself the framework to work out your definitions. And so when you have a theophanic or hierophanic experience, or, you know, journeying, divination, whatever, and something happens, that gives you the framework to go, well, this means this, and that connects to that. If you don't have that exoteric foundation at all, you've kind of got a completely blank page, or you're sitting there and going, this could literally be any being, this could literally be any god, and this could literally mean anything. And so then you're kind of desperately calling out to whichever other human might be able to give you an answer, and hoping that that's a nice person that's going to be well informed and trustworthy, who is going to say, well, from my angle, I'd consider going to, you know, Freya, or from my angle, I would say, you know, Anmarken, or from my angle, I'd say, we'll see what Athena's doing. But if you aren't doing anything at all that is Roman or Gaelic, or, I mean, it doesn't need to be historical, you could be a Wiccan or whatever, but you kind of need to have had that coven and that community there, and to have sort of, I feel like you need that foundation, because otherwise it's really hard to connect dots when you don't know that there are dots there and you've just been given wires.
So I think that to that point, Emily makes a couple of good ones. That's an excellent point. It doesn't need all to go online. Also remember that whomever you follow might have a lot they're keeping private. I'm one of those people. I talk a lot about esotericism and my personal hierophanic and theophanic experiences, but there is a shitload of stuff that I will never talk about online. Also, this, I think people tend to put more online initially because they're looking for external validation. that their experiences are legitimate. And I fully agree with that. I've seen it. I've fucking done it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a fun time for someone, just probably not you.
And that's another point to exoteric before esoteric. And I'm saying this as someone who started with esoteric. Like, Sarenth will be back. I got dumped into the esoteric way, like, legitimately before the exoteric was a thing for me. I quickly kind of made up for that and jumped into the exoteric because I knew I needed that base and was told by good people that I did need that base, which I'm very glad for. But it's important to, per Josie's point, it's important to have that exoteric base from a purely practical standpoint, not just for connecting the dots and informational reasons, but also for having a foundation to fall back on, having relationships to fall back on. It's a lot like the physical world where, cool, I'm walking into a new space. If I get into a lot of trouble, I have someone I can call, right? If you're broke down on the side of the road, having someone you can call is really nice. Mm-hmm. If you're stuck in Jotunheim because you got lost on a journey and can't get back, having someone you can call is really nice. Spiritual buddy system, as Josie says. Like, yeah, it's good.
Because I remember even just like a couple of weeks ago, we went to go see my other half's family down the other end of the island, other end of the country, Ireland. And you see all the kind of caravans and tents and shop stalls and stuff by the beach. You know, we'll do a tarot reading for, you know, £25 for 2 minutes or whatever. And I was like, well, you know, if you're that fussed about it, like, I'll read for you when we get home. You know, like, it's, you know, sure. Yeah. You know, you're my other half, you know, whatever. And there'll be a significant difference just in terms of framework and direction and everything, because I'm not going, here are some cards, and I predict that next week you're going to run into a guy in green trousers who's going to give you a really great deal at that restaurant you like. Instead, I'm going to be sitting here beforehand and probably praying to gods I connect to with divination and gods I connect seership to. And so I have a completely different framework here, and I'm therefore viewing the sort of tools that I'm using here in a very different manner. Because I mean, even in sort of our circles, you see people treating tarot or Om or runes as sort of beings and entities unto themselves. And or you see people using them as the phone to get from the info from straight from the gods or the ancestors or whatever via that medium. And so things like that kind of can make a considerable difference. And I mean, that's, you know, sort of an example from, yeah.
No, that's and that's very true. Like, there is absolutely value in getting completely outside, I've never met you before type of divination that's useful for discernment purposes, but you've got to do a lot more vetting beforehand to know that that reader is not just cold reading you doing whatever and is actually communicating.
Right.
Whereas if it's somebody you know who can demonstrate and has demonstrated, here's who I'm talking to, here's how I'm talking to them, here's our relationship, here's our history. Yep, never go hiking without telling at least one person where you are going. Yeah, like, that's important. That can make a huge difference in not just whether or not you trust the information, but also the information you receive and how you interpret it.
Is the information fucking usable? If this asshole doesn't know where Jotunheim is, you don't want to use them as a resource for how to get here and there. If you can't point out Jotunheim on a map, I don't need you telling me how to get there.
Right. I mean, I can't point out Jotunheim on a map, but I can take you there.
I'm
I'm just
you know
being
what I'm saying,
simple.
asshole.
I know. I'm just
It's
being
when Malik
simple.
starts singing, I will show you the world. Sorry, I will show you the worlds.
See, and now my theater brain is going to, how can we turn this into a folk song? Awesome,
Yeah.
thanks.
Mhm.
Malik stars in Aladdinson.
And everyone is horrified.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vikings running around Arabia.
Okay, this honestly, it sounds like better than what Disney came up with for their remake.
I mean, that wouldn't be difficult.
I will show you the world tree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think though, like, if you're not grounded in the exoteric, if you aren't grounded in the specific kinds of things
Mhm.
that make a diviner actually useful, what are you getting out of this diviner besides pablum?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm coming down really harsh on this shit, partly because a lot of people treat divination, where you're actually communicating with the gods, as therapy. And it's not that. And I say that with very deep intent because I've worked with tarot cards and oracle cards in a therapy setting. It is very useful. And I had a really great therapist, so she was actually having me commune with the spirits that were present in the cards as a medium.
Mm-hmm.
And the cards were then the medium through which the therapy session would unfold. Like in this case, it was an animal oracle, and whatever animals popped up were the animals that were present and guiding the therapy session. Even that is different than just going to a random ass reader and saying, "What's my fortune?"
Mm-hmm.
And fortune telling has a pedigree. It is old as fuck. It's fine. But there's a difference between getting divination done where you're communing with gods, ancestors, and Vatir, and then fortune telling. There is a
Right.
wealth of difference.
Yeah.
That's why for me, I feel like that religious framework, it's, it helps.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, like I said, if you're walking along the beach and see fortune teller, like, you don't know if you're getting like a heathen with a serious framework there, or if you're getting, a Wiccan who's put in 30 odd years, or if you're getting someone who wants to be Penn and Teller. Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're not wrong. I mean,
yeah.
And it's hard for one guy to be Penn and Teller. That's how you know that the cards really have a spirit. That joke works especially well if it's a female presenting person that they're reading for, because then it's Penn and Tell her.
And this is why we wanted you on. Go for it, Malik.
So, where do you draw that line then, Snow, between the esoteric and the exoteric? What's the distinction for you? Let me put you right on the spot with a hard question.
All the easy questions.
Uh-huh.
I mean, like most things, I think it's a big grey, blurry, liminal, to use everyone's favorite word. I mean, a sort of obvious answer would be, can I see it if I'm in a room watching you do it? Like, if I'm stood next to you, I can see you light a candle, circle it around your altar, and then I can hear you say your prayers and see you put the offerings out. If you're journeying, I'm just seeing you sitting there. If you're doing divination, I'm maybe seeing you pull something out of a bag or out of a box. But, a lot of that is kind of physically hidden. That feels like an easy answer. I'm not sure it's the most accurate answer, but I think it kind of serves in most functions, or it serves in sort of most contexts. And I guess the other thing would be, if you thought too much about it, how likely is imposter syndrome to kick in? So if you're doing ritual, that's routine. You've got a script. You know what's happening there. With the best will in the world, regardless of how many times you've done that meditation routine, or how many times you've listened to, Jin Two Snakes telling you to picture that root coming out of your spine and, the scent of the middle of the earth or whatever, it will be different every time. And like even having theophany or hierophany during ritual, that will be different every time, where if you script in pauses or whatever into your hearth cult. And so with that sort of degree of unpredictability, that is kind of harder to externally verify. It's harder to sort of show someone and go, this happened and I can show you XYZ sources for it. Instead, it's kind of anecdotal evidence, and I have to have the faith and trust in you that what you're telling me happened, if that makes sense. And like I said, if you thought too much about it, the imposter syndrome is likely to kick in if you're kind of less experienced with that kind of thing.
It kicks in even when you're more experienced.
This is true, but we don't tell people that bit. That felt like 5 answers to your question, but
no, but I appreciate it though, because that's the thing, is it's a multitudinous thing. It's not one.
Mm-hmm.
We're polytheists. Right. Poly is part of our nature.
Mm-hmm.
Take that wherever you will.
Well, and I think the kind of talking around it nature of the answer is kind of part of the thing, right? Like we talk a fair bit about mysteries and hierophany, theophany, things like that, and how you can't really explain it. You can talk around it, you can try to put it in words, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't work that way. Part of that's just the nature of words and language, but I'm not going to get into that because I'll rant for 20 minutes and we'll be out of an episode. But I think that's kind of part of the nature of the esoteric, is that you can't exactly fit it into words because it inherently eludes definition. It is the hidden, it is the thing that you can't see. When you look at it too hard, it moves or it disappears.
Or it fucking eats you.
Or it fucking eats you. That's also a thing, but we're just really going to Jotunheim in this.
I mean, honestly, like, I've done a lot of journey work lately, and it's kind of made me really appreciate how much foundation is required to do this sanely, or at least saner. And I'm using that with some serious meaning behind that, because without that foundation, you don't know what the fuck you're looking at, and it's really hard to be oriented to reality. Which is why jumping in the deep end of the pool with esoteric work right off the bat is so fucking dangerous. Because if you are unmoored from your reality, and I don't mean, I need to take a step back, because what I'm not saying is that people who have mental illness can't do this stuff, and I will not cop at all to anybody that pushes that. You can be schizophrenic and have an esoteric practice. This is part of why having an exoteric practice, regardless of your mental health status, is so important. Because you can get completely fucking lost and buggered by your experiences if you don't have a way to understand them and then integrate them. I have watched people go through mania and psychosis episodes who presented no mental illness previous to an experience, because they were completely unmoored from reality and had no context. I've done divination for people like this and had to reorient them. So I'm saying this with no small amount of caution, and I am not for a moment saying get off your meds. Please take them. The meds are there to help you. Nor am I saying that you can't or shouldn't do esoteric work and you must only do exoteric work. I think esoteric work is for everyone, and my concerns equally apply whether or not you have mental health issues at hand. Because honestly, without that orientation to reality, it is completely easy for people to have multiple or even a single hierophanic experience and become completely unmoored and not sure what to do or how they exist.
Mm-hmm.
If your first esoteric experience is getting blasted to pieces, you are going to need somebody to help you pick those pieces up and put you back together. And I really feel for the people that don't have community that's available and competent to do that, because those can be rupturing experiences, no different than what we see with chemically induced psychosis.
I was going to say, for a rather crude analogy, it's the divine acid trip.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you could be, perfectly fine and able to drive yourself to work 3 hours later, or you could be in hospital for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because, you went full Sid Barrett and Pink Floyd will never be the same.
Yeah. I haven't told the story in public yet. I did start with the esoteric. That's just kind of how the introduction to this side of things worked for me, is that surprising everyone, I had to be thrown in head first or I wasn't going to go.
Shocked.
Yeah, like this is very shocking. You can see the shock on both of their faces. My very first experience was quite literally my teacher at the time. And keep in mind, I had no exoteric practice. I hadn't made any offerings. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And my teacher at the time basically ripped my soul out of my body and took me as deep as she had ever gone in the underworld, and then deeper, to the point where, and I quote, reality dissolved. Without going super into detail about where we went, because it's not super important, the place we went I can legitimately only describe as the graveyard of gods, or a graveyard of gods, filled with old forgotten things that humanity no longer thinks about. Like, that's the best way that I can describe it. And it was genuinely terrifying. That was part of the point. And the only reason that I'm okay now is because I had her and all of the community that she brought with her around me to make sure that I got out okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, if I had done that by myself, I'd probably still be a wreck years later. So when I say things like, hey, do the exoteric first, it's very much I've done the opposite. You don't want to do that. I had to because of who I am, and that's stupid. I can say that that's real fucking stupid. God, that was terrifying. I
mean, I think a big thing is religion can be life-changing.
Yes.
Like, especially, sort of if you think about all the stereotypes and tropes of converts, like, converts are the most fervent, converts are the ones yelling loudest. Like, typically, or at least, okay, in this country, I'll say, or on these islands, people who grow up in a Christian household really don't care about Christianity because it's the wallpaper. People who become Christian in their 20s are the ones who go be priests or go yell about selling Bibles on the street and start reading out verses with their headphones on or the headset on. Like, it's the fervor of the convert, and you see it in like films and documentaries and things. Someone will have a divine experience and then they go find a priest to go explain to me what happened, and I need points of reference and an anchor and a direction to go in. And I mean, it's much the same here, really. You kind of, whether it's something happened and then you go, I'm going to go look into polytheism and get into this, or you're into, several years into a praxis, or, you've got your religion down and you have an experience that can suddenly sort of twist everything, and then everything's slightly wonky, and you have to go to someone and say, I need reorienting here. Like, because I mean, the sort of faith and belief are sort of major core things that a lot of, I mean, I'm not a, I never did psychology or anything, but faith and beliefs is a lot of core stuff, like internally, and like just shifting that, like not only is it normally really, really hard, that also kind of collapses and reshapes everything else going on in you, like personality and everything else. Like, I mean, you look at sort of therapy and they go into core beliefs and stuff, and they sort of say core beliefs in terms of like self-opinions and stuff in CBT. I don't know how familiar people are with that.
CBT, for those who don't know, is cognitive behavior therapy.
Yeah. And so they sort of talk in that about how if you're growing up and you're sort of the kid constantly shut down by the teacher, then when you get older, you internalize the core belief of I'm stupid and sort of things like that. But I mean, if you took that literally in this context and talk about core beliefs as kind of the base foundation of your religious framework and your religious life, if something major happens to suddenly cause a shift in your beliefs, everything built upon that in, between birth and that moment, like, is suddenly wonky. And I think that's also why we have such an issue with people talking about Christian baggage and stuff. When something is so seriously ingrained into them and into their psyche and into their worldview, whether it's at the forefront of their lives growing up or whether it is the wallpaper, and you're suddenly having to go, well, if you want to get from this religious sort of framework and viewpoint to Z, this point over here, then there's some serious kind of shifting and changing and stuff you need to do, and you might not necessarily realize how deep these foundations go.
So that's a really important. I'm sorry, go ahead, Maleck. You were going to talk.
I was going to say, if all you've ever seen is the wallpaper, you might not realize that you need to tear that wallpaper off to even get the walls.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I'm going to take this in kind of a funny direction. If your definition of stud, thinking about this in terms of walls and wallpaper, if your definition of stud has nothing to do with the wood that's in your walls, and then somebody tries to talk to you about the studs in your walls, you think this motherfucker's talking about men hanging out in your walls.
Yeah.
Context is hugely important, and having the proper verbiage to contextualize what is going on is absolutely necessary. Now, I think it'd be fabulous if I could tear my wallpaper off and there's a bunch of studs behind it. Unfortunately, that's also like the Cask of Montillo kind of shit. So, like, maybe not.
Yeah.
So, context is not only important, it's really, if we're going to have conversations and means to meaning, we don't have to be prescriptive with our language, but our language actually has to describe something concrete. And this isn't a theoretical talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're talking about real lived experiences and how you couch those. So if all you've ever experienced is God as the Trinitarian God, mm-hmm. whether you're an atheist or not, if you're an atheist for whom that is your understanding of religion and you try to become a heathen out of that, you still have Christian baggage to unpack because your conception of divinity is still couched in monotheist terms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to push back on something just for a second.
Go for it.
Language never describes concrete things. We think it does, but it never actually does. We think it does, and it's necessary for us to think it does, but it doesn't actually do that. The best example of this that I've ever used is define for me what a chair is. Everything that you will think of, there is at least one example of something that you will call a chair that does not fit that definition. And if you go far enough to where you are including everything that you would think of as a chair, or call a chair colloquially, you have now described things that you also will never call a chair.
The skeletons
yeah.
in the closet.
Studs in the walls. It's fine.
Why is my house full of bones?
It's all those studs hanging around you never fed.
Right. And I say that to bring up the point that we exist only in context. And that's important because figuring out what your context is in the moment, because it changes sometimes literally moment to moment, but figuring out what the context is that you're working in, at least enough that you can make sense of what you're doing, is kind of the key here. The key isn't to get to object reality, because we can't. The key is to get enough context that you can make sense and make meaning of what's happening.
No, that's a very fair point. I suppose concrete is perhaps not the correct word, but at least you need to have enough of a reciprocal relationship with the way things are that you can properly get around.
And I hope I wasn't coming off as attacking, because that wasn't what I was trying to do.
No.
It's just an important point that I think needs to be borne out, because too many people think that object reality is a thing that we can access, and it's not. Too much of our, literally, to use the internet example of the dress, right? Some people saw it as gold and blue, and some people saw it as, I forget what the other color sets were. And it's literally, no, your perception of those words is what's defining how you physically are seeing the thing.
Yeah.
Your perception is shaped as much by the language that you use as the language you use is shaped by your perception.
Right.
It's a give and take, and you can't really get to that object reality. Another example is, since we briefly talked about Rome earlier, the word that eventually evolved into, I think it's maroon, originally would have described colors that we would call turquoise, red, gold, and brown. All of those were considered one color by the Romans. And today we think of red and blue, which turquoise is roughly a shade of blue, as opposites, right? In a lot of senses. To the Romans, some of those shades were considered the same. Language is weird, and it shapes our brains as much as our brains shape the words we use, is my point.
I was going to say I could find like 3 points to go off of that there. Because I mean, language and color theory is bizarre. Like, I mean, glass in Irish is green, glass in Welsh and Breton is blue. And generally in sort of Celtic languages, they view glass as being on that green-blue spectrum, but it has to refer to a natural thing. It can't be an artificial shade. And then they'll have different words for it if it's artificial or man-made, that pigment or that hue or that shade. So, you know, language and color. But then sort of, I mean, a lot of what you said there is stuff that ancient polytheists were also debating, which, I mean, I always find really comforting, the fact that we're sitting here having the same discussions and debates that they were having like centuries or millennia ago. And I'm like, well, we got back to something. Because, I mean, in sort of the Vedic philosophical schools in sort of ancient and early medieval India, you get the idea of is physically what we experience all that there is, sort of the classical definition of materialism, which also existed in ancient Hellenic schools. sort of, you know, the classic definition of materialism, as opposed to what materialism is now with the idea of consumerism, the idea that physical materials is all that there is. But then also the questions of, is there an inherent self? Is there an independent self? Is the self a construct reliant on the context of various other things? A regular sort of meditation exercise you see a lot in Buddhism is find the chair in a chair, because you picture a chair and you go, well, that's the seat. The seat isn't a chair, and those are the legs, and the legs aren't the chair. And you go, well, the whole thing is somehow a chair, but there's no inherent chair within the chair. But, you know, and you kind of get into that whole sort of thing, which feels relevant to sort of the start of your point there. But I mean, from sort of where us three are as heathens, it's the web.
Which I don't know. Honestly, like, I think that's part of why I appreciate having the drinks and having these talks, because so much of this is pretty heady shit. And I mean, we're just scratching the surface. And this isn't even, you know, we're not even on the ship of Theseus question. We're just, what the fuck's the chair? We're not even on the well, if I take all the component pieces apart from the chair, once we define what a chair is, and then I replace over a course of several years, it's still the fucking same chair. Like, identity is funny and weird and wonderful. And if we can have this debate about a chair, how much more so the gods?
How much more so ourselves?
Sure.
And like, I'm gonna go on record saying I fucking hate Plato. Plato can kiss my ass. But like his whole thing about like the allegory of the cave and the realm of forms and all that, like that's kind of in the same vein, where it's like, I mean, kind of, like the chair you're seeing isn't the chair I'm sitting in, isn't the chair, is a lie. I mean, kind of like the chair I'm sitting in isn't the chair, right? It's a pale imitation of what Plato would call the chair, capital T, capital C.
It has elements of the chairness of the chair, but it is not itself the chair.
Yeah. It's complicated. And that's kind of, to Snow's point, that's what Plato was talking about when Plato was alive. Like, if Plato was alive, that's beside the point. Like, we've been tackling these subjects for thousands and thousands of years, and probably will be for thousands of years to come, and I think that's really neat.
Is there the Platonic idea of the forms present in pack tradition, though, as you engage in the form of the wolf?
I hate you. Oh God, I hate you.
What defines the wolfness of the wolf or the packness of the pack? Is the defined pack the pack that can be named, or is the pack that is the pack that is unnamed? Or does it contain all packness within its pack?
I hate both of you.
So to let Maleck steer on that, sort of, going back to, I mean, I think a core thing sort of there in sort of heathen thinking is the interconnectedness of everything. And that's the interconnectedness of absolutely everything. Sort of internal, external, metaphorically internal, metaphorically external, this realm, other realms, regardless of how many realms your cosmology has.
Lol, way to go, Snow. Yes!
Thank you.
I love watching the smoke pour out of Maleck's ears.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm like, how do I answer this?
Because
you
then,
don't.
sort of, as people get further into heathenry, I think a lot of people, hopefully, people realize how, for want of a nicer word, self-centered their worldview was when thinking about the interconnectedness of everything. They're very, because we inevitably experience everything. Yeah, because inevitably we experience everything from ourselves. Like, that's kind of, this is where our senses are. That's kind of, we don't really have much of a choice there. But then when you think about the interconnectedness of everything and sort of philosophically or cosmologically or whatever, are you still putting yourself mentally as the main character in this system? Are you still putting yourself as the central hub? Or as a heathen, are you managing to put everything on a even keel? Or are you putting the gods at the center of that and putting yourself sort of out slightly? Or, you know, and that
Or
kind
are
of...
you like hugging the god's coattails? Or are you claiming direct one-to-one relationship with being a god? These things are important.
Right. Because I mean, the sort of mental image I always go for her is like, if you think about solar system models, so you've got, you know, sort of spheres around each other. Sort of, are you where the sun is? Or are the gods where the sun is? Or, you know, is everything on one even line? Or does everything sort of to varying degrees inevitably have, you know, points higher and lower on this model?
Or to use the term, and I don't remember where it originates, polycentric polytheism. Everywhere is the sun. All
That's
at once.
that's Dr. Butler's term for it.
Is it? Okay.
It works. It is what it is.
He being problematic in his own right doesn't mean he's wrong all the time. Anyway,
I mean, the thing that it's funny, I didn't realize I was muted, so I was talking extemporaneously, and I'm trying to remember what the fuck I said.
I don't know, but it looked really clever.
Thanks. Oh, shit. Oh, I'm really partial to the Stoic egg model, but in the way that Mark from the Axe and Plow puts it, in where it's an elliptical, and each of these lines comes really, really, really close together in a relationship, and also further apart depending on where you're at in that track. And I'm really partial to Stoicism in general, just because I think it's a much more coherent philosophy for living in the now than what Platonicism, that's a word, Platonism is.
For those listening at home, rolling on floor laughing, Sarenth talking up all those studs in his walls.
So anyway, back on track.
Kat has a good question.
Yes, go for it.
Can those positions shift?
They can.
Not just can they do constantly, like literally all the time. They are always in motion.
Ooh, Emily has a really good point. I think that is a challenge of life. How do you place yourself at the center of your life without placing yourself at the center of the universe? Real fucking good point. And I think this goes to the model that I was talking about, where you and the gods are on tracks that may intersect, and you might actually, like, kind of like train tracks, you might actually like take this route versus that route. I'll have to post the picture of what I'm talking about with Mark's permission in the server, so the folks can take a gander at it. But this is a really important point, because we do have experiences of humans becoming gods. And I think that we dismiss this at our own danger, because if we take away the ability for us to become divine, we separate the gods from us in a very clear, delineated fashion. If we can never cross that bridge, then that means the gods are utterly on the other side. And the relationship we have with them is not one that can be kinship, but one that is distant. Does that make sense?
It does.
There's a danger, because you can delude yourself into saying, I'm a god and I can do all these amazing, wonderful things. But you also, if you preclude divinity from humanity, you cut off entire relationships, right?
I tend to say yes. But as I talked about kind of in my theology of pack magic post, that's kind of a central point of pack tradition, is that there is the spark of the divine in all of us. And there are schools of thought that don't think that. Coming at it, keeping in mind that I do not believe this point, coming at it from the complete opposite side, say there is a point where a god, if gods are completely separate from flesh, or if gods are completely separate from humanity, if a god were to become flesh, say Heracles in the Greek, Heracles as a god becomes flesh, does all these things. He is still bound by the limits of flesh while still being divine, but that also breaks apart when you look at it too close, because
people who drowned in the Nile were revered as gods, and it did not matter their social station.
interesting.
Antinous is one of these, the best known that I can think of off the top of my head. If we preclude the ability of the gods to make us one of their own, we limit the power of the gods to make kinships, to define who and what they are, and to develop relationships as they will, in ways that, well, if I can't do this, nobody else can, is kind of from the strict materialist point of view, is like, well, we can't be gods because we can't do all these extra things. Sure, but what's usually a requirement is that we die in order to become gods.
I make this point all the time. Death, as we think of it in the modern time, the modern materialist sense, we think of death as an ending, and death is not an ending. Death is only a transformation. We talk about death as being different for gods because death is just a transformation, as though death is not just a transformation for us. And I think that's a false dichotomy, because death for us is just as much a transformation as it is for the gods.
Are we losing you still?
I'm thinking.
Oh, okay. You had this look on your face of y'all have just lost the plot.
Which is completely unlike us to get completely fucking sidetracked into nonsense.
But I think that, like, bringing it back to the esoteric and exoteric things, because you can go this deep with a single experience, this is why having that grounding is so important. If you have gotten lost during this talk we just had, imagine you're in a ritual and you are being presented these things, wham, 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 with no ability to process them. Or with a ritual context in which processing them is secondary to experiencing them first. This is why exoteric practice is so fucking important, because if what I'm saying comes off as word salad in a normal conversation, how much more so? Yeah, normal, big fucking air quotes, thanks. If what I'm saying comes off as a word salad and we are just having a somewhat normal, slightly inebriated conversation, how much more so when you are in an emotionally charged ritual atmosphere with smoke and lights and all the theatrics that brings, and wham, now you've got to deal with this new reality you are being slapped in the face with, no context for it.
And I think that's also an important point, is that the exoteric isn't just a precursor, it's also a postcursor.
Yes.
It's not just what you do as the groundwork to build up to the esoteric, it's what you return to when you come back.
Exoteric practice is the organizing principle of polytheism and animism.
It is. And you can't be like, okay, cool, I'm going to build up to the esoteric and leave the exoteric behind. That's not how it works. You've got to come back to, it's the saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Right? There's a tarot throwback for you, says Kat, death being a change and transformation. I mean, it's not wrong. But like,
because if
Go ahead, Snow.
No, I was going to say, because if it's the foundation, you can't then move into the house and decide you don't need the foundation anymore because you got a house.
Exactly. Like it's what everything's built upon, right? It's the walls around you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What Josie said.
It's the backbone of any coherent and workable practice.
Yep.
I mean, when we talk about cleansing, grounding, centering, shielding, it's not just because you need to do good ritual prep to enter into it cleanly. You need to be able to reorient yourself to this world reality however many air quotes you need to put in front of that, you need to be able to reorient yourself and bring the experience into your lived consensus-based reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there is a barrier up and the only time that you experience this is when you're in ritual space, then it's not going to impact your everyday reality like it should.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other part of esoteric practice, is that if you're not doing it in some way, shape, or form to affect your everyday life, that is, before and after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Well, that enlightenment needs to bring something back when you come back to consensus reality.
Before I lose it again, I do want to answer Snow's question for me, which was, how do I define the pack? And I'm going to focus on the pack because I'm going to focus on the one, which is funny because the pack is inherently plural. So it's funny that Snow brings up the Platonic forms, because I used that. That was a latching on point for me to initially understand these spirits. And I actually put that in one of my very early blog posts. I'm gesturing with my hands like you can see me. In one of my very early blog posts, I literally said, if you think of the Platonic form of the wolf or the pack, you're kind of getting a handle on it, which is actually both demonstrative of my misunderstanding of these spirits at the time and also my misunderstanding of how Platonic forms function, because Platonic forms are inherently static, at least from my understanding of them as they were explained to me by people who know better, is that they're inherently inactive. They don't do things. They're not, they don't have agency, is my understanding of them. I could have that completely wrong. That's beside the point. Also somewhat self-contradictory, doesn't matter. So damn it, I had it and I lost it, which is kind of the point. God damn it, Josie.
Sorry, Maleck.
No, you're good. So this is kind of what we're getting back to with you can't define these things. You can only talk around them. To say that I completely understand the pack would be a lie. It would be a bold-faced, flat-out lie. I have experienced the pack multiple times, pretty frequently, actually. Words fail inherently. Damn it, I had a much better way to say this.
Are you trying to grasp the ineffable? Good luck.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's kind of the thing, though, is to experience the divine is to experience something that does not fit into words, and to try to put it into words is useful but isn't the point. The pack as a spirit, to my understanding, is a thing that is constantly both generating and being generated by the bonds of connection among all of the things inherent to the pack. It's a thing that is self-contradictory and self-generating at the same time, because it is both, right? To be part of the pack, you have to be included within the pack, and to be included within the pack, you already have to belong, which is quite literally self-contradictory, right? The cats are fighting. It's great. I hope nobody else can hear that.
No, we can't. It's okay.
That's fine. As much as I fucking despise Plato, he was right in that you genuinely cannot touch the divine with your mind and survive. And you certainly cannot bring it back in any way that makes sense. Everything I had is gone. So I'm going to just say that I failed to answer Snow's question. You win, and we're going to go back.
I think that this gets to an important thing, though, in that there are distinctions that make differences between things that define the edges of where one begins and the other ends. For instance, the rune spirits, as I understand, the Runevitir, are not the gods, even though all of us take basis from the Gnunga gap if you go back far enough, when we were an undifferentiated whole in the void. I appreciate you, Melkor.
Yeah,
Good attempt.
laughing.
10 out of 10.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
But I think that differentiation and that constant renegotiation of who we are and what we are in Congress with and to and across from one another cannot be firmly defined at any one point in time, because those boundaries are consistently being renegotiated. How do we say this is a god versus that's a spirit? The way that I define a god is that it is a cosmologically significant being. And that says fuck all as to whether or not it's big or small. And that is intentional.
I was going to say, aren't humans cosmologically significant?
Yes. And that is intentionally obfuscatory while also being informative, because this allows for a wide variety of what can be considered a god. Because we have deified humans. Bragi, for instance, is one that is pointed to. We also have, again, Antinous, various drowned people in the Nile. The pharaonic lines of various dynasties were considered living gods, or at least intermediaries. Ooh, Emily makes a really good point. I think that the part of the benefit of an exoteric practice is the ability to integrate ineffable lessons and wisdom experienced in the esoteric. Otherwise, that wisdom tends to evaporate. I agree, and I think this is why so much of our spiritual experiences are couched in poetic language.
And I was actually going to make that point, is that this is kind of the job of the poet, the prophet, the seer, the devotee, is to try as much as you can to bring that down to a place where other people can experience it. Not to actually genuinely describe it, but to bring it down to a place where other people, to provide a gateway where other people can then experience it. And that is not to say, because some people do this and say that only myth as ecstatically sung by the poets is true. That's not what I'm saying. Poetry doesn't have to have meter and verse. Poetry can be damn near anything. Words fail. You can't really define it, but you know when you see it. And
so to this point, I would actually like to read the poem I just made for you. This, what is it, yesterday?
Yeah, it was yesterday, or early this morning, one of those.
To give a living example of what this is like.
I mean, I think it was this morning my time. I think you went to sleep, but
yeah.
So this is for the Silence Who is Death, which is a big spirit or a god from the pack. I am the closing jaws. I am the yawning maw. I am cold tongue. I am the clenched teeth. I am the muffled wail. I am the grasped throat. I am the torn neck. I am the gasp. I am the pant. I am the murmur of blood. I am the clouding of eyes. I am the numbing. I am the quiet. I am the silence who is death. When all fades, I am there. And that is a taste. And that does not encapsulate all of what that thing is. But that is a taste.
And it's speaking of
Sorry.
no, you're fine.
I was
silence
watching
is-
like you're gonna put Maleck into a trance here.
Oh, I'm right on that edge. No, it's silence is one of the initiators in pack tradition. One of the primary, roughly speaking, there are two primary initiators in pack tradition: silence and howl. Life and death. It's hard to define, as we've been talking about, but these are the two primary initiators. Silence is who initiated me primarily. They walk hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, but silence led most of my initiations, to put it broadly. And it's that was absolutely a taste. That was a taste of who silence is, what silence is.
Ironically, with words.
Ironically, with words, because we as humans have to understand through words. But to understand silence is to understand silence, and you inherently can't do that through words. You inherently have to be quiet to understand silence, but also screaming, because there's a lot of screaming with silence, but that's beside the point. It's also interesting because silence is death, but silence is also birth. Silence is the moment. Silence is the thing that the wolf enters into to bring the prey to death. Silence is the death. Silence is rot. Silence is the moment in the birth canal just before you are born. Silence is the thing under the earth where you live before you can enter, before you can leave, before you can be fully born into the world.
Honestly, the aspect of silence that is the scream honestly really reminds me of Harlan Ellison's "I have no mouth and I must scream."
Yes. Silence is also the space between heartbeats. Silence is also the space between breaths. Silence is also the cancer we all carry in our veins. Because we all carry our own death in our veins. If you live long enough, your cells will mutate until you have cancer and you die. And that's where silence is too.
To be completely terrible, that's the sound of forgiveness. Screaming and then silence.
Yeah.
That's good. That means you've experienced something, Kat.
Yeah. And Kat would know.
I am rather proud of that poem. I'm rather proud of it.
It's really good. It's really quite good.
Emily says, I don't know. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I don't know if we have to understand with words, but it's one of the easier ways to communicate our understanding to others. I mean, whether we're doing grunts, coherent speech, dead silence, and it's just a look, there's a multitude of ways. I am not initiated. This is also something that I'm bringing to the table. I'm not initiated. So even this understanding of silence is the outsider looking in. I was once told it's hard to translate for wolves. Maybe that's why Snow doesn't get an answer.
And that's part of it too, though. Bouncing off of that is that it's not just wolves. I've talked about this in the blog a bit. It's wolves and it's humans and it's dogs and it's coyote.
I was going to say fallen snow is a different kind of silence.
That's true. That's very true.
That's the thing. Silence, visual artwork is also a form of communication, which is actually funny because that's part of what silence governs. Is silence also governs the nonverbal communication. Silence governs body language and the things that we do not say but still communicate.
Like 90% of our fucking actual communication.
Yes. And silence is both the cold void of space and the rot of the compost heap, which is very hot. If you're not familiar, compost heaps actually get very, very warm, like greater than 100 degrees Fahrenheit in many cases. And it's both of these things at once. It is the nearly absolute zero cold void of space, and also the nearly burning heat of the compost heap. It's both of these at once. I need to stop talking before I completely just am gone.
So the importance can't be overstated of having a standard of practice, whether or not it's rooted in reconstructed polytheisms. There needs to be some kind of grounding in reality that people can bring back their experiences to an even keel, integrate into their life, and then do something with it. Otherwise, you are just faffing about and mentally masturbating, which is fine if that's your objective, to just jack off into the ether. But if you actually want to do something useful and bring back enlightenment to, say, your own life or somebody else's life, you actually need to be able to integrate it. Words are important. This is how we communicate. This is how, well, even more important than this is how we communicate, because 90% of communication is nonverbal. Words are how they stick around long term. Whether you set them down in stone, parchment, digitally, or just in somebody's head from oral communication. Words are how, I mean, you know, this is how we bring things back and then bring this forward into reality. We are almost at 2 hours. We should probably think about wrapping up.
Yep. Closing thoughts. Anybody go ahead.
Please go ahead, Snow. We've both nattered on for a while.
I mean, I think the sort of major undercurrent through most of the sort of latter part of that was just make sure you're living your religion, and it isn't just an intellectual exercise. If the whole thing is so that you can start LARPing and cosplaying, or so you can sort of sit there mulling over what ifs or let's sees, and then once the exercise is over, you carry on with your day as if nothing happened, then what was the point?
Yeah, well said.
Live your religion.
Yeah, love your
Real
religion.
quick, silence the introvert's language. Yes.
Yep. I like that though. Ending on live your religion is, I think that's a good end of the episode.
So if folks want to join us in the Discord for the after party, I will be there shortly. By all means, everybody that's been listening, please join us. Yeah, thank you for keeping our guests on their toes, especially Maleck.
Right.
Yes. And I really appreciate you taking your time out. I know this is pretty late in the evening for you, Snow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for showing up and having this great talk with us.
Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you back on.
Yeah. Alrighty, y'all. For those who are going to be there, we will see you in the after party. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
See you then.